Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Ratio Christi event this week. My name is Daniel Maritz, and I am the Ratio Christi Chapter Director at the University of Pretoria. Now, who is Ratio Christi? We are a student ministry rather I should say an apologetic student ministry who trains and equips students to give historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for following Jesus Christ, and also to engage with the prevalent ideas in the culture around them. And as a student ministry, of course, we really do appreciate anybody who's willing to help us out with any donations. We are dependent upon financial donations, and so if our ministry has really been beneficial to you in the past, and you feel like donating, please feel free to help us out on that front. And to do this, you'll also find the link in the description of this video below. We do have a website, www.ratiochristi.co.za, and on the website you can also find additional information on our cause, our vision and mission, and what we're busy with. You'll also find good recommended reading to mature in your Christian faith, and we also publish weekly informative articles, and so I can also encourage you to really go and check out the resources there on the website. Like I said, we have these events on our YouTube channel here happens on a weekly basis, and so also feel free to subscribe to our channel. And on this note, next week's event will be with Dr. Clay Jones, and it will be an interview focusing on his latest book titled Immortality: How the Fear of Death Drives Us and What We Can Do About It. That is next week, Thursday evening's event. Now, let me introduce our speaker for this evening's lecture. So it's really my privilege to welcome our good friend Dmitry Rozet from Russia. Dmitry, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for taking the time to share some of this knowledge with us.
It is my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dima. And so let me just give you some background information on Dmitry. Dmitry was born in Russia in 1973. In 1993, he joined the team of the newly founded Russian Center for Apologetics Research. The acronym there is CFAR. And Dima is going to share some more info on their ministry and what they're busy with. You might remember a couple of weeks ago, we also had an event with Roger Ratwebembere from Uganda, and he's a colleague of Dima. They work for the same ministry, but Dima will share more on this. In 2014, Dima was ordained as a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Ingria. He has lectured on cults and apologetics at a number of seminaries and churches of various religious affiliations, and is a longtime faculty member of the Evangelical Lutheran Churches of Ingria Seminary and also the St. Petersburg Christian University. He has presented papers on contemporary cults and apologetics at a number of international and domestic conferences. He is also the author of various articles published by the Center for Apologetics Research. And as translator and as editor, he has adapted several full-length English language books for the Russian language, including Reasoning from the Scriptures with the Jehovah's Witnesses by Ron Rhodes, The Word of Faith Controversy by Robert M. Bowman Jr., and Mormonism 101 by Bill McKeever and Eric Johnson. Now, like I said, Dima is a good friend of Ratio Christi South Africa. He has joined us, he has visited us last year to help us out with our annual Ratio Christi Symposium. And thank you again very much, Dima, for joining us again and helping us out again with our ministry efforts. And
I had the fondest memories of the last years, so it's really a great privilege to be here with you tonight.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Dima. And on this note, I'm gonna give it over to you. And the topic for this evening is the organizational thinking of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you have ever been in conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm sure this will really be beneficial to help you navigate some of these conversations. And I can assure you, if you haven't, one day it will happen that a Jehovah's Witness will come knocking on your door, and you will be involved in some sort of conversation with them. So please enjoy tonight, and thanks again, Dima. And I'm going to give it over to you.
Thank you, Danielle. Well, dear friends, good evening, and let me show you briefly the name and address of our center so that you can write it down. I hope you can see that on your screens. The name of our organization is the Centers for Apologetics Research, and the international website is www.thecenters.org. The organization is international. We have branches in several countries all over the world: South America, North America, Europe, Russia, and Africa. And if you go to this website, www.thecenters.org, you can get specifics for those ministries. Basically, the Ministry of the Centers for Apologetics Research is counter-cult. So we research and write about the new religious movements. And since the Centers is a Christian apologetics ministry, we try to do that from the Christian standpoint. And our centers are not confessional in a sense that we do not defend any particular denominational viewpoints or teaching, but we rather defend the historic Christian faith that unites all Christians. And that gave us a particularly great rapport with Christians in Russia, with Christians from many denominations. And my center, which I'm affiliated with, is located in St. Petersburg, Russia, and its operations are mostly done in Russian. I could give you the website for our particular center, but since it is not in English, I don't think it'll be any good for most of you. So you can pretty much go to this website that you can see on your screens, and you get information about our center in Russia as well. And because we've been teaching for a number of years in Christian colleges and seminaries in Russia and other countries, we have encountered a particular problem that many Christians do not know the basics of the Christian faith. And so in the last several years, we have been developing several courses on general apologetics in addition to the counter-cult ministry, which is the main emphasis of our center. I guess that'll pretty much be the gist of the information about the centers. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them at the end of our session. But now let us switch to the main topic of this evening, which is Jehovah's Witnesses. Let me briefly switch to my main presentation, which is Jehovah's Witnesses, God's visible organization. And of course, you can hear that English is not my first language. And if there's something that I say that you do not understand properly, or that's probably does make sense in English, feel free to ask questions and I'll be glad to clarify. But let us begin and try to do our best in researching this topic. Of course, theologically, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, commonly called Jehovah's Witnesses, is a cult of Christianity. That is a religious group which pretends to be Christian while denying the fundamental tenets of the historic Christian faith. There's much to say about the ways they distort the biblical teachings, but this time we'll concentrate on just one issue, which has a special influence on their public preaching and their self-understanding. It is the unique Jehovah's Witnesses concept of visible theocratic organization. Just a little bit of history. The Watchtower Society currently teaches that from the 2nd century AD onwards, faithful Christians were held in a form of Babylon captivity, which was comprised of all forms of organized religion, including the imitation Christians, quote unquote. In 1919, after a brief period of refinement, which lasted from 1914 to 1919, Jehovah God began to gather his faithful into the restored Christian congregation, then called the Bible students. In the same year, a small group of earthly administrators called the governing body was appointed as a faithful and discreet slave mentioned in Matthew 24:45, to provide spiritual food or spiritual nourishment to others. In 1931, this new organization changed its name to Jehovah's Witnesses, and that is the organization we're talking about today. Okay, let's see what they actually say about themselves. And I've provided references to all the quotes that you'll be seeing on your screens. And in this particular case, the quote is from the Watchtower magazine in its simplified translation, year 2014, 15th of May, pages 22 and 23. So you can actually go to the Watchtower website and check out these references, these quotes in context for yourself. So here's what it says. After false religion is destroyed, Jehovah's Witnesses will be the only religious organization left on earth. Then Satan and his world will attack God's servants. The sovereign of the universe will immediately rescue his people. After rescuing his people, Jehovah will begin the war of Armageddon and will completely destroy Satan's world. Armageddon will bring an end to Satan's world, but Jehovah's organization will remain. In other words, in this world of ours, there is only one true organization that is going to survive the Armageddon. And at this particular time, it is, and actually ever since 1919, it's been the only visible organization upon the face of the earth that conveys the truth of God's word and his will to the inhabitants of this planet. And according to the Watchtower, ever since the fall, human beings had to choose between two principal organizations, the one that belonged to God and the one that belonged to Satan, the devil. Evidently, today, the organization of God is only present upon the earth in this visible form of the Watchtower Society, or Jehovah's Witnesses. And this is how Jehovah's Witnesses almost poetically describe the choice faced by every man and woman today. Let us see the next slide, and here goes. Watchtower 1994. Two figurative tables are set before mankind. Each table is identified by the kind of symbolic food placed upon it, and all of us are eating at one or the other. However, if we wish to please God, we cannot be feeding at his table and at the same time be nibbling at the table of demons. So when they talk about the only true visible God's organization, they actually mean that it is the only source of truth, and you cannot go to anybody or anything else for the truth if you want to please God. And so there's absolutely no surprise to see this said in one of the publications back in 1961. From a study of God's word, one appreciates that Jehovah does not dispense his dynamic energy through just any organization, but chooses to label itself religious. Neither does God deal with individuals independently of his own wifely organization, the mother of all those dedicated to God. For these added reasons, then, association with this organization is essential if one hopes to receive Jehovah's Spirit. So you have the only true visible organization, which is the only source of truth, the only way of communication of Jehovah's God with the mankind. You cannot go to anybody else for this truth, and you cannot go to anybody else for salvation, and you cannot really hope to please God unless you belong to this organization and you are a faithful part of this body. Belonging to the only visible organization of God brings you several benefits. Let's talk about that for a little bit. The benefits of belonging to Jehovah's Witnesses' visible organization. The first benefit is unity. And I have provided the actual photocopy, the actual cutout from one of the Jehovah's Witnesses magazines, The Watchtower, June 1st, 2011. And here's the underlined part that I'm going to put a stress upon. To dwell in unity, we need order, and order requires organization. Only a unified brotherhood can have God's blessing. So you have to belong to this only visible God's organization because it is the only way you can have unity. And only by having unity you can hope to have God's blessing. The second benefit that is promised to this one single, unique, visible God's organization is spiritual guidance. And Jehovah's Witnesses say that this organization selected by God, chosen by God, has his special spiritual guidance through the medium of its leadership. And here's what it says. The Watchtower, November 15, 2013. Through his organization, Jehovah provides an abundance of spiritual food to the whole association of brothers worldwide. Much spiritual counsel is provided by means of our publications. In addition, at times the organization gives guidance directly to congregation elders, either through letters or through instructions delivered by traveling overseers. In such ways, the sheep receive clear direction. When they say that the organization is the only way of communication of God with mankind, this is not a figure of speech. It is actually a channel through which God sends his will or declares his will to people living on earth. And in some of their publications, Jehovah's Witnesses actually say that when faithful Jehovah's Witnesses are reading the Watchtower publications, they can hear the voice of Jehovah God. So, in effect, the publications of the organization are God-breathed. They are filled with his spirit. They are his truth. They cannot be doubted. The third blessing or benefit which people receive from being a part of Jehovah's Witnesses organization is this: salvation. You cannot be saved apart from Jehovah's Witnesses' only visible organization on earth. The Watchtower, February 1st, 1996. True Christians are in a saved condition in that they are in an approved position before God. As a group, their salvation is sure. Individually, they must meet God's requirements. However, we can fail. Basically, the picture is like an umbrella. The organization of Jehovah's Witnesses is an umbrella, which by definition has God's blessing upon it. In order to be a recipient of these blessings, you have to be under the umbrella of God's organization. If you do not obey the rules of the organization, if you somehow go against the grain, then you are expelled from the organization, or you expel yourself from the organization. You're no longer under this umbrella, and you're no longer a recipient of these blessings. And thus you do not have a salvation, or the salvation they talk about. The third and the last benefit we're going to be talking about is eschatological survival. According to Jehovah's Witnesses eschatology, the future is very sad for the mankind, because there will be this tremendous battle of Armageddon where people will be killed by thousands and millions. And the only people who can survive that great cataclysm would be the people selected, chosen, approved by Jehovah God. And here's what they say in the Watchtower in 2006. And again, the Watchtower is the magazine published by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Just as Noah and his God-fearing family were preserved in the ark, survival of individuals today depends on their faith and their loyal association with the earthly part of Jehovah's universal organization. If you want to survive in the coming catastrophe, in the coming cataclysm, you have to associate yourself with this earthly, visible God's organization. Well, so much for the benefits. Let's go ahead. If the organization is that important to Jehovah's Witnesses, one wonders what is really what kind of place do they have for Christ in their preaching? And it is really not a big surprise to find out that the main emphasis in their preaching is really not Christ, not salvation, not God's grace, but the organization, because it is the organization which to them is the focus of all God's blessings and benefits. Let us see one really interesting quote, which was repeated in several Jehovah's Witnesses publications beginning from 1990s. And this particular book that I'm going to be quoting from was lastly published in 2019, I believe. So it's a very recent publication. And let's read these portions that are underlined on the screen. Bible students will make spiritual progress and grow to maturity if they recognize Jehovah's organization and cooperate with it. Teaching them how to do so is important. Of course, if you can have God's blessings apart from God's organization, teaching people about Jehovah's Witness organization is the most important thing you can do. From the very beginning of your Bible discussions, help the student to see that Jehovah is using an organization to get the preaching work done on earth today. You have to really understand what it means. It means that Jehovah's Witnesses have something that is called a field ministry. That is, they go door to door, preaching their good news of the kingdom or the doctrine of the Watchtower. And what they say here is that from the very beginning of your conversation with a potential convert, that is, with a person you've met for the first time in your life, you have to introduce them to Jehovah's Witnesses organization, because Jehovah's Witnesses organization is the focus and the only channel of all the blessings they can receive from God. And you actually, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you actually have to help your student to see that Jehovah is using an organization. And it is not about Christ or salvation or grace. It's about an organization that is the only vessel of salvation for people living on earth today. And the section ends with this. As the interested one grows in appreciation for Jehovah's organization, he will draw closer to Jehovah. So basically, the closer he becomes with the organization, the closer he becomes with God. And thus, by preaching organization, you pretty much preach God himself. Having these blessings, these benefits of belonging to the only God's visible organization comes at a price. If you want to be a part of this organization, if you want to remain a part of this organization, you have to avoid independent thinking. And that is not something I've just made up. This phrase is often found in the Jehovah's Witnesses publication. They actually tell their followers that independent thinking is evil, is something that effectively separates people from God and causes them to stumble. So in these last days, people especially need to avoid independent thinking because the time is short. And there's this little technique they use in their publications. They make it appear as if like 30 or 40 years ago, when there was a lot of time left before the end of the world, before this judgment, the Armageddon, they could have more freedom to research other topics, to go beyond what the Watchtower teaches. They would be more liberal in the way they treat doctrinal issues. But in actuality, if you go back 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, you will see that Jehovah's Witnesses have always been teaching people that the end is right around the corner, that people do not have the time to use this freedom to research other doctrines. They have to be loyal to God's organization, so that when Armageddon comes in the next several years or dozens of years, they will be ready to face the judgment of Jehovah God. So avoiding independent thinking, sticking with the only visible God's organization upon the earth is really instrumental to one's salvation. Let's see several quotes that they give about this. The Watchtower, July 2001. In order to remain spiritually protected, we must remain under the wings of Jehovah. This means that we must not develop a spirit of independence. Let us always stay close to Jehovah and his mother-like organization, not separating ourselves from their direction and loving counsel. And this is the second time we hear this term about this phrase about the mother-like organization, and that's something Jehovah's Witnesses say a lot. They actually picture the organization as their mother, and they actually say that it is not possible to have Jehovah as your father if you really don't have an organization as your mother. The next quote comes from the Watchtower of the same year, but a different issue, August 1. Here it is. Since oneness is to be observed, a mature Christian must be in unity and full harmony with fellow believers as far as faith and knowledge are concerned. He does not advocate or insist on personal opinions or harbor private ideas when it comes to Bible understanding. Rather, he has complete confidence in the truth as it is revealed by Jehovah God through his Son, Jesus Christ, and the faithful and discreet slave. I have mentioned that in passing, almost sideways, but when Jehovah's Witnesses speak about the faithful and discreet slave, this phrase has a very specific meaning to them. By the faithful and discreet slave, they actually mean the governing body, or the people who direct the operations of the Watchtower organization, the Watchtower directors, people who are vested with the spiritual power to be representatives of Jehovah to his organization and to the rest of people on earth. So basically what they're saying here is that if you want to be in unity and thus have all the blessings promised to the visible Jehovah's Witness, visible Jehovah's organization on earth, you should not advocate your personal ideas. You should not harbor your personal understandings. You have to be loyal to the ideas that are transmitted by Jehovah God through this faithful and discreet slave, that is the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. The Watchtower 1996, loyalty to Jehovah's organization. If those who stumbled over these matters had been loyal to the organization and to their brothers, they would have waited on Jehovah to clarify these matters, which he did in his due time. Thus, loyalty includes waiting patiently until further understanding is published by the faithful and discreet slave. Loyalty to Jehovah's visible organization also means having nothing to do with apostates. Loyal Christians will not be curious about what such people have to say. Here's what this quote is about. Over the time, a lot of people have left the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of them did for ethical reasons. Some people had lost their faith, but to many people, the doctrinal differences between the Jehovah's Witnesses organization and the Bible have become obvious. And when these apostate people begin to believe things that Jehovah's Witnesses believe to be heretical, like the Trinity, the deity of Jesus Christ, the eternality of the soul, and some other things that they believe to be pagan additions to the original Christianity, that's exactly what the Watchtower has to say about that. They say that these people left the organization before the organization had a chance to clarify those issues. And if those people would be loyal to the organization, they would have patiently waited until they get the clarification they need. And those people who have left the organization, they have nothing to say to the people who are still loyal to the only visible Jehovah's Witness or Jehovah organization upon the earth. So how do you maintain good spiritual health? How do you stay within this realm of God's blessing under God's umbrella? By firmly rejecting satanic propaganda and fully availing ourselves of God's provisions to make us solid in the faith. And in the context, these provisions that we have to avail ourselves of are the publications of the Watchtower organization. So you have to reject the satanic propaganda, anything that goes against the teaching of the Watchtower, and use the publications of the organization. Back in 1967, in the Watchtower magazine, one could read this. Thus, the Bible is an organizational book and belongs to the Christian congregation as an organization, not to individuals, regardless of how sincerely they may believe that they can interpret the Bible. For this reason, the Bible cannot be properly understood without Jehovah's visible organization in mind. So when Jehovah's Witnesses forbid people to look elsewhere for the answers or to think for themselves independently, it is not only the question of discipline. They actually tell the people, their constituency, that you cannot understand God's word, you cannot understand the Bible if you do not belong, if you do not listen to, if you're not loyal to the Jehovah's only organization. It is the only source of truth. It gives you the only true interpretation of the Bible. And one of the early leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses, actually, I believe it was the founder of the Watchtower organization, Charles Taze Russell, he said that if a person reads the Bible for many years and does not read his books, then he will remain in spiritual darkness. But even if a person does not read a page of the Bible but reads his books, he will see the spiritual light. Because in actuality, the only final source of truth, the only final source of the true interpretation without which the Bible is pretty much unintelligible, would be the publications of the Watchtower Society. And although today Jehovah's Witnesses would not probably put it that bluntly, the idea is still there. You have to be a part of the organization, you have to read the publications before you can hope to understand the Bible. And the only reason why those other people believe in all sorts of things that Jehovah's Witnesses believe to be wrong, to be heretical, is because they do not avail themselves of the publications of the faithful and discreet slave. That is the Watchtower organization. Jehovah's Witnesses have the special publication called the Kingdom Ministry. It is basically a newsletter which is distributed among the faithful. It is not to be distributed outside of the organization. It gives some basic guidelines on how to preach the contents of the next Watchtower magazine or the next publication to people outside, and give some ideas, some advice on the internal life of the organization. And among others, other publication, among other rubrics in this newsletter, there's a rubric called the question box. In September 2007, in this question box, you would find this question: does the faithful and discreet slave endorse independent groups of witnesses who meet together to engage in scriptural research or debate? Again, we're not talking about people who go to somebody else for advice. We're not talking about Jehovah's Witnesses who would go to Christian churches or who would read some non-witness books. We're talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, the faithful, who are meeting together for independent Bible study and research. Does the faithful and discreet slave, that is the Watchtower organization, approve of that activity? Here's the answer. Surely we're grateful for Jehovah's spiritual provisions in these last days. Thus, the faithful and discreet slave does not endorse any literature, meetings, or websites that are not produced or organized under its oversight. for those who wish to do extra Bible study and research, we recommend that they explore Insight on the Scriptures, that is the Bible encyclopedia, 2-volume set published by the Watchtower organization. All Scripture is inspired of God and beneficial. That's another book published by the organization. And our other publications, such as those that discuss the prophecies found in the Bible books of Daniel, Isaiah, and Revelation. So if you want to study the Bible, you have to go back to the publications of the organization. Back in the 1980s or 1990s, Jehovah's Witnesses have published this video called the Watchtower, an organization behind the name, or Jehovah's Witnesses, an organization behind the name. And for the most part, it was almost about an hour length, and almost for all that hour, they would discuss the publishing activities of the organization. But one small portion of that video, that film, was devoted to the research they do for the publications. And they actually showed some footage of people doing research in the Watchtower library. And the commentator, the man behind the scene, would say that here you see people who are doing the research for the publication, and you see 2 people who happen to belong to the highest level of Jehovah's Witnesses hierarchy, actually standing before bookshelves, holding the Watchtower publications in their hands. So basically, even in that particular moment, probably not understanding that, they actually gave a very visible or clear indication that the only research that is done for the publications of Jehovah's Witnesses is based upon the previous publications, upon the voice of the only visible God's organization upon the earth. This requirements of absolute allegiance is especially important when it comes to doctrinal changes. And to everybody who studies the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, of the Watchtower organization, it is absolutely obvious, it is evident that the doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses have changed over time considerably, 180 degrees. And they have to somehow explain how it happens. And the basic explanation is this. The Bible in the book of Proverbs says that the path of the righteousness of the righteous becomes brighter and brighter until it reaches the brightness of the full day. And they claim this verse to be actually about the continuing revelation. They believe that Jehovah God is constantly improving the revelation he is giving to his people, so that every once in a while we're getting another bit of revelation not known to the previous generations. This is a nice picture, which is totally foreign to the Bible. But the funny thing is that oftentimes Jehovah's Witnesses would actually take something they would claim to be a revelation 20 or 30 years ago and say that it is false and replace it with some new revelation. So in actuality, it is not a continuous revelation, but it is God reversing himself on some serious important point of doctrine. So basically, we're left with a choice. Either it is God who is reversing himself and does not really know what he's talking about, or Jehovah's Witnesses are not really a good messenger. They corrupt the message they've been entrusted with. And both options are really tragic, and I would really hesitate to pick one of those. But let's see how it works in actuality. In 2014, in the Watchtower magazine, they have confessed. For instance, our understanding of Bible truth is constantly becoming clearer. This is to be expected, for the path of the righteous is like the bright morning light that grows brighter and brighter until full daylight. Proverbs 4:18. That is the only verse, where the major verse that they use to support their doctrine of continuous revelation. But here's one of the most important changes. In 1967, Jehovah's Witnesses organization has changed its teaching about the superior authorities in Romans 13, verse 1. And of course, if you go back to the Bible and read Romans 13, you'll see that Apostle Paul demands absolute obedience to these superior authorities. And for many years, from 1929 to 1962, Jehovah's Witnesses considered themselves to be persecuted organization. And of course, as a persecuted organization, they really did not believe in obeying the earthly authorities. And so according to their interpretation, the superior authorities would be Jehovah God and Jesus Christ. But in 1962, all of a sudden, and they explain this change by the fact that they've been working on the new translation of the Bible, and so the biblical text became much more clear to them. But anyway, in 1962, it was convincingly set out that the superior authorities mentioned here are indeed the political rulers of this world. And there's really much to say about this change and about the interpretation of this verse. But the most important question is this. It is really not evident, not obvious from this text, but we can think about this for a minute. Jehovah's Witnesses organization has been officially organized in 1988. In 1919, Jehovah God, according to the modern chronology, which is really modern, it's only about 10 years old. But anyway, in 1919, Jehovah's Witnesses have been selected by Jehovah God to be his only visible channel upon the earth. But when you look at this chronology provided in this particular quote, you'll see that it starts with 1929. So the good question is, what Jehovah's Witnesses have believed before 1929? And the answer is they believed exactly what they believe after 1962. So initially, they really did believe that the superior authorities would be Jehovah God and Jesus Christ. Then in 1929, they received a revelation, a new light, and following that, they changed their interpretation to the superior authorities. I'm sorry. Initially, they believed that that would be the earthly authorities. In 1929, they received the revelation and changed that into believing that superior authorities were Jehovah God and Jesus Christ. And in 1962, they went back to the original interpretation that they once abandoned, claiming that it was actually God's word and God's truth revealed to them. So it is not a progressive revelation. It's a revelation that goes back and forth. And if you look closely at the Jehovah's Witnesses publication, you can see many examples of this. And let's look at the most blatant example. There is one particular fine point of doctrine, which is really not that important. And I can't really tell you why Jehovah's Witnesses pay so much attention to this. But over the years, over the last 150 years, Jehovah's Witnesses have changed their stance upon this particular point of doctrine 4 times. And the question is, will the inhabitants of Sodom, or the Sodomites, those ones who have been destroyed by God, will they be resurrected? In 1879, in their publication, they said that Sodomites will be resurrected, at least some of them. In 1952, they declared that Sodomites will not be resurrected. In 1965, they declared that Sodomites will be resurrected. In 1988, they declared that Sodomites will not be resurrected, and that's how it stands today. So they have reversed themselves on one particular issue of doctrine 4 times, and that is really not a progressive revelation. But what is really important and interesting about this is that in 1980s, Jehovah's Witnesses had a main textbook, the book that they actively used to promote their religion at the doorsteps. It was called sorry, the name escaped me somehow, but I'll definitely recall it later. But anyway, here's the point. This book came in 2 editions, and between the edition of 1982 and the edition of 1988, there was only one significant difference. Here on page 179, paragraph number 10. In 1989, they say that it will be difficult but possible for the sodomites to be resurrected. In the 1989 edition, they say that it will not be possible for sodomites to be resurrected. And here's the last phrase of the 1989 edition. Jesus here was emphasizing the reprehensibility of the people of Capernaum by saying that it would be more endurable for the ancient Sodomites who, in the mind of his Israelite audience, were totally unworthy of a resurrection on Judgment Day. And again, mind you, this is the same book, and the change was made in the text of one and the same book. And you can imagine a Jehovah's Witness who was given this new book in 1982 and told to go preaching door to door, telling people that sodomites will be resurrected. And in 1989, he is given a second edition of this same book, and he actually have to go to those same people he's been preaching for 7 years, telling them that Jehovah has given him a new revelation, and now the sodomites will not be resurrected. One of the longest and the most interesting pieces of history that shows how the doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses change is concerned with the doctrine of the generation of the 1914 generation. Here's this thing. For about 50 years, Jehovah's Witnesses have been telling their audience, the people around them, that the world will end. Jehovah will judge the world before the generation that has seen the year of 1914 will completely die out. And over the years, this doctrine has been gradually changed to fit the changing time. Let's see how it works. In the Watchtower of 1951, they were talking about the limits of the generation. And they would say that according to Matthew 24:34, the generation that has seen the events of 1914, when Christ has invisibly assumed his ruling position, his kingship position in heaven, those people will not die before this earthly system of things will end. And based upon the words of Psalm 90, verse 14, they would say that the length of that generation, that's the span of the generation, is 70 to 80 years. So within 70 or 80 years from the beginning of a said generation, the end should come. And that's what happened next. If you take 1914 and use this number, 70 to 80 years, and you believe that only people who were 15 years of age and older in 1914 are to be included in that generation, which is actually what Jehovah's Witnesses have said in 1968, then you will have to make this calculation. Take 1914, subtract 15, and then you have the figure 1899. And if you add the maximum age span or the maximum length of the generation, that would be 80 years, it means that the maximum time span of the generation would be 1979. When this date, 1979, was fastly approaching, Jehovah's Witnesses felt that something had to be changed. And in 1978, somehow in one of their publications, they have said that you should not count as part of the generation those people who have been newly born. So basically, the babies who were born in 1914 should not be counted as 1914 generation. But then 1979 came and passed, and nothing happened. In 1980, Jehovah's Witnesses have lowered the threshold of the generation, and they said that people older than 10 years of age should be considered as a part of this generation, which gave them additional 5 years. In 1984, when the next date was approaching, they said that even the newly born should be considered a part of the 1914 generation. And thus, they've extended the maximum length or the maximum time when this prophecy could be completed to 1994. And again, since we're talking about the newly born, people who were born in 1914, and they've pretty much tied themselves to Psalm 90 that says that the length of the generation is 80 years. You cannot really go beyond 1994. 1994 is the last time, is the final point. You cannot really claim for this prophecy to be fulfilled any later. And so in 1995, Jehovah's Witnesses have canceled this prophecy altogether. The prophecies they've been talking about for 50 years. And they said that this verse in Matthew is actually talking about all the evil people living in the world, and it does not give us the reason to calculate any dates of the end time. So basically what you see this, and I understand that my English here does not help much, but you can see from this table that Jehovah's Witnesses are actually moving the threshold of the generation further and further back to suit their situation, in this futile attempt to retain the prophecy, to keep the appearance of a true prophet. And finally, when there is really no place to go, they cancel the prophecy altogether, and they never apologize before the people they've expelled from the organization or before their current constituency for being mistaken. They've just said that the light has shone brighter, we've got a new revelation, now we understand the Bible text better. Now we do not believe in the 1914 generation anymore. Nobody is to blame. Jehovah's Witness, Jehovah has given us a new interpretation. Sometimes these changes concern matters of life and death, and probably one of the most tragic stories has to deal with the organ transplants. In 1961, Jehovah's Witnesses have forbidden all organ transplants from human to human, because they actually believed that these transplantation operations are a type of cannibalism. You are sustaining your life from the life of your fellow human being. And for many years, up until 1980s, all transplantations, all surgeries of that kind in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses were banned or forbidden. In 1980, Jehovah's Witnesses organization, the Watchtower, has written this: "It may be argued too that organ transplants are different from cannibalism, since the donor is not killed to supply food. There is no biblical command pointedly forbidding the taking in of other human tissue. It is a matter for personal decision." And since that time, Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to undergo those operations, but Jehovah's Witnesses have never apologized before people who have been crippled because of that particular ban, because of that ban on transplantation surgery. And if you look closely at the arguments Jehovah's Witnesses are using today to forbid the blood transfusion, the situation is absolutely analogous, because the laws of the Old Testament, they refer to, they forbid intaking of the blood of a killed animal, of an animal that has been killed for food. But according to this logic, you cannot really justify your refusal of the blood transfusion because the donor is still alive. The logic is absolutely the same. And actually, a transfusion is pretty much a type of an organ transplant, only the organ is not a piece of meat, but it's basically a life-sustaining liquid taken from one living person to sustain a life of another living person. And the tragic side of this is that many people, I can't really give you a figure, but probably dozens of people die every year because they refuse the blood transfusion. Of course, the Bible does not require us to take others' blood, but to forbid the blood transfusion and to promise people God's wrath for taking it would be absolutely unbiblical and inhuman. And that's what happens in Jehovah's Witnesses. And just to make one last point, if you look closely at the way Jehovah's Witnesses think, at their mode of thinking, you tend to think of a particular word that was coined by a writer named George Orwell, an English writer who wrote a novel called 1984. It is a famous novel that basically gives you a picture of an authoritarian system that rules people by manipulating information. And that's how he explains what doublethink is. Doublethink is the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. To tell deliberate lies while genuinely believing in them, to forget any fact that has become inconvenient, and then when it becomes necessary again to draw it back from oblivion for just as long as it is needed, to deny the existence of objective reality, and all the while to take account of the reality which one denies. All this is indispensably necessary. Even in using the word doublethink, it is necessary to exercise doublethink, for by using the word one admits that one is tampering with reality. By a fresh act of doublethink, one erases this knowledge, and so on indefinitely, which with the lie always one leap ahead of the truth. And that's pretty much what we see in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. Doublethink is the name of the game, is something they actively teach their constituency, something they absolutely use to manipulate and control their followers. And those people who refuse to play by their rules, those people who do not want to participate in that game, they are disfellowshipped. And the word disfellowship means exactly what it sounds like. People who are expelled from the organization are denied any fellowship. And that concerns your relatives, your children, your friends, people you've known for dozens of years. If you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness and you run into your ex-fellow believer in the street, that person would look at you as if you're non-existent. He'll pretty much look through you as if you're made of glass, because to him, you're non-existent. He cannot have fellowship with you for the fear of being disfellowshipped himself. and thus Jehovah's Witnesses, in order to maintain this policy of artificial unity, they actually deny people the most tender feelings. They disassociate, they separate families, friendships, and most close associations. And that's really tragic. I think this is as far as I can go tonight, but if you guys have any questions, I'll be glad to answer those. And thank you very much for listening and for sharing with my imperfect English, to say the least.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dmitry, for that very handy presentation. My name is Simon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm part of the Russia Christi team at Northwest University and had the privilege of working with Dmitry. And I'm going to just help us walk through the Q&A session at the moment. Yes, so a few questions here, Dmitry. I've got one here. It's in connection with the leadership of the organization.
Okay.
The leadership of the organization at its end must end with individuals in power.
Mm-hmm.
Who is currently at the top of the society to have the ability to write scripture for the Watchtower? Have there been infighting in the leadership? I kind of think this can also be a question that can be directed towards the Mormons as well, because they kind of, as you've explained to us, and if I'm correct, they set themselves up as a magisterium at some level.
Pretty much. Actually, the name of these people are known. You can find their pictures on the internet. And they used to have a president who remained a president for life. Now they elect a president every once in a while. But these people are believed to be those wise and discreet, faithful and discreet servants who is used by God, or which is used by God, to supply people the true interpretation of the Bible. And you have to understand that Jehovah's Witnesses do not really claim to be writing scriptures. They claim that the Bible is the basis, the sole foundation of everything they do and believe. Okay. But in actuality, they also say that you cannot understand the Bible apart from their help. And when they interpret the Bible, they do damage to it. They twist it the way they like. And there are several people on the intranet who have been a part of the international headquarters of the Watchtower. And they've actually worked in the publishing department, and they've actually seen those people bringing in articles and text introducing those changes. And of course, you cannot really look into people's heart and minds and see what's going inside of inside. You can say they're deluded, they are lunatics, or they're highly corrupted people. I don't have a good answer for that because I don't know them personally. I can't really be a judge of that. But I'm absolutely certain, I absolutely do believe that they do understand what they are doing. You cannot introduce changes at that level without understanding of what you're doing. You may believe that you're doing a good thing, but still you have to understand what you're doing.
So it follows from that then that if this is the structure and that governs this organization, and I've heard it said that you have to have a pretty big publishing operation, because basically that just controls everything. The churches don't really operate with preachers preaching their own sermons. Basically, everybody's just told to follow the literature. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard from some people that they are the largest publishing organization that's ever existed.
At least they used to be. I can't give you a present figure, but they used to be the largest, one of the largest printing operations in the world.
Primarily because it's a function of the structure you've explained to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. And it's not only the publishing structure, it's also a teaching structure, because they've implemented this very stratificated system of bringing the doctrines published in that literature down to every single Jehovah's Witness to make sure that he reads it, learns it, and shares it with others.
Okay.
So there's this whole system of streaming this doctrine down the ranks.
Yes.
with the help
Yes.
of magazines and books and other publications like brochures and stuff, and websites and videos.
Okay. Okay. So here's another question for you. What are some of the practical tips for Christians to effectively engage with Jehovah's Witnesses? This is a kind of, suppose you bump into a Jehovah's Witness if they're visiting you. We have them here in Potchefstroom. I've had conversations with them on the street here. What is your approach to dealing with them? Often they're going to begin with the Bible. I know a little bit about the history of the organization, so I'm a little bit more confident because I understand how critical that is to go after the organization. So maybe that's not good advice. I've used it before to ask questions of the Watchtower. But what advice can you give us in terms of effectively engaging with Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, generally, I believe that asking questions is the way to go in any situation. Not talking even about Jehovah's Witnesses in particular. When you're talking to somebody who is not likely to think for himself, who is not fond of critical thinking, who is under the influence of an organization that is pretty manipulative and authoritarian, one of the major things you have to do, you have to actually make a person think for himself. And asking questions is probably the best instrument you can use. Because I can't really get into the depth of this, but I can advise a really great book and a really great author that you can go to. That's The Tactics by Greg Koukl. He's the guy who is probably the one you go to for that particular lesson. He can teach you to ask questions. But you have to understand that the problem with many Jehovah's Witnesses is that they live in a black and white world. They trust their organization unquestioningly, and they do not trust you at all. You are a part of the world of Satan. Literally, you bring them this food taken from the table of the devil. So they are taught not to listen to you. And when you try to teach them something, they are supposed not to listen to you. They have to reject everything you say. But when you ask questions, you're basically inviting them to think for themselves about the text that is sacred to them. It may be the Bible or some magazine or some publication of the Watchtower. And probably the best thing to get people thinking is to show them the actual contradiction between their own publication or between their interpretation of the Bible and the Bible itself. And once they see that contradiction, that is a very powerful thing, because it is not something that you've told them, but it's something that they've seen for themselves. And once you get this thought inside your head, it's really hard to get rid of it. And it'll be going over and over and over again. And sometimes it gets them thinking far enough to make them question the organization.
Okay, very good. There's another question coming through. Can you give us a quick overview of the way Jehovah's Witnesses view the person of Jesus?
Sure. It's pretty basic. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus Christ initially was Michael the Archangel, the first and the best creature of Jehovah God. He was used by Jehovah as an artist, as a contractor to build the earth and the whole universe. So basically, Jehovah has created everything through the medium of Michael the Archangel. Michael the Archangel is said to be like God because he spent around God millions of years, and he has grown to be very much like God, but he is nothing like divine. He is a creature, and he is limited. At some point, Jehovah has sent him into the world, and he has become a human named Jesus. He was accepted as a son of God, pretty much during his baptism, and he lived on earth as a mere human being. And then he died, and he died not on a cross, but on an upright stake. And for Jehovah's Witnesses, that is important because they believe that the cross is a pagan doctrine and a sure sign that Christianity has borrowed a lot from the pagan mystery religions. And when Jesus died on the pole, he was placed in a tomb. And then miraculously, by Jehovah's power, his body was dissolved into gases. And so Jesus has never actually re-emerged from the tomb. He disappeared completely. There was nothing left of him. And 3 days later, God in heaven has created Michael the archangel again from his memory. So basically, Michael the archangel, who is right now in heaven, who is sometimes called Jesus Christ, or who is enthroned in heaven, he has never been Jesus Christ in the first place. He has never been resurrected because he's never died. And of course, Apostle Paul says that if Christ has not was not resurrected, he didn't rise again, then we're still in our sins. But in Jehovah's Witnesses doctrine, Jesus Christ has never risen again. He was not resurrected. He was recreated. And Jehovah's Witnesses deceivingly call this a resurrection, while it is definitely not.
Okay, so that's interesting then. So is it also true to say then, in terms of their view of Jesus, what do they make of the resurrection appearances then? Is that, what do they do with those resurrection appearances in the Bible?
Basically, what they say is that Michael the Archangel wanted to convince people that he is alive, and so he would temporarily assume physical or appearances of physical bodies to show himself to people. But this is very troublesome and problematic, because basically at one point, disciples are afraid of when they see Jesus, because they believe that they see a ghost, which is true according to Jehovah's Witnesses. But Jesus Christ says, do not be afraid, because it is me. Touch me and rest assured. So basically, he has deceived knowingly and purposely his disciples into believing that he was bodily resurrected, according to the Watchtower, even though they would never make that claim. But that kind of follows from their teaching.
Yes. I've got a question then for you, because I have brought it up with the Jehovah's Witnesses. It comes from the question of, would you say it's fair to describe the Watchtower organization that calls himself the Faithful Servant as being the prophetic mouthpiece for God in this time? And if that's the case, does it meet the criteria of Deuteronomy chapter 18, which actually gives the criteria for those to be prophets? Do you think that's a fair verse to go to and say to him, well, if you have presumed to speak in the name of God, then the criteria for being a prophet for God is that if you presume to speak in the name of God and whatever you say doesn't come to pass, that makes you a false prophet. I've taken Jehovah's Witnesses to that verse then, and then I've put on the table, for example, what you showed us this evening is some of these reversals or these things. Do you think that that's a fair way to engage them from Deuteronomy chapter 18?
It is, but it is a little problematic now, because Jehovah's Witnesses have been downplaying their prophetic authority lately. I believe there was a phrase in one of their publications when they actually said that the organization is not God-breathed. So it is not. It does not have this biblical authority of speaking from God inherently. And if you ask Jehovah's Witnesses, they would say that that the organization is errant. It is comprised of humans who are capable of mistakes. And most times they would not really call the organization a prophet, even though if you go back to the publications of the 20th century, like 1960s or 1970s, you will see that they actually said that the Watchtower organization is a collective prophet, and that the prophet that is now on earth is not just one person, but a body of men who is collectively called the governing body. So that was the teaching of the organization, and that they've stepped away from that is a problem in itself. You see, when they gave a lot of false prophecies in the past, they actually claimed to be prophets. So even if they do not do it now, it does not get them off the hook, because they would claim something, claiming prophetic authority, and that would not happen to pass. That would not realize itself. So basically, they have been false prophets for about 100 years, and even though maybe right now they do not speak about that directly, still they have a whole history of the failed prophecies, and that's one of the most visible and most interesting parts of the Watchtower history.
Okay, we've got another question, and we know that you've got another appointment there, Dmitry, so we don't want to waste time, but there's some good questions coming
Sure.
in here. There's a question here. What is the gospel according to the Watchtower? What is the impetus behind their evangelization?
It is interesting, and I would probably give you two answers. One is when we speak about the gospel, we speak about the good news, something that is the most good, the best news to somebody who is preaching. And to Jehovah's Witnesses, according to the literature, at least, the good news of that caliber would be that in 1914, Archangel Michael, or Jesus Christ, who is not really Jesus Christ anymore, has assumed his kingly position in heaven and will never come back in a visible and physical form. So that's that message about 1914 effectively serves as the gospel for the Watchtower Society. And of course, it mentions Jesus Christ, but it really does not have to do with Jesus as much as the Christian gospel. But if you talk about the gospel as something that you stress the most when preaching, something that you put the most emphasis on when you talk to people, that would be the organization. And if the person who is asking this question has not been with us from the beginning, I would suggest that he goes or she goes back to the beginning of the presentation. I've given a specific quotation from a Jehovah's Witness publication that actually says that from the beginning of your conversation with the interested person, you have to stress that Jehovah God is working through the earthly organization, and if your appreciation for that organization is evident, it will give that person a chance to develop his own appreciation. So basically, in practice, this gospel boils down to giving people the organizational publications and getting him to go to the organization for the answers. I hope it makes sense.
No, I'm that's fine. I'm just trying to see of what they would make of, for example, traditional Christian views of things like atonement and Jesus' sacrifice for sin, and I mean, what do they do with that? Is that they talk about Jesus? Is he just an example as a good man, or is his work on the cross serve any purpose or function for the individuals?
Strangely, they talk about grace, they talk about faith, they talk about the mercy of God shown to us on the cross. But eventually, it all comes down to people having to work out their salvation. So whatever grace God gives to us or has given to us in the person of Jesus Christ is not sufficient to save one by believing in Him. You have to work for your salvation. You have to do certain works, especially if you're not part of the anointed ones. You're not part of the 144,000 who are anointed by definition, by the virtue of belonging to that class. And even them, they still have to prove their worthiness to God. If, for example, one of them dies and happens to be unworthy, he is removed from the roster and somebody else is selected upon the earth to take his place. So nobody is really safe in the organization. Everybody has to prove that he's worthy. So to them, death of Jesus Christ is more than an example. It really does show a certain merit of grace, but grace does not merit salvation. It is not enough to save a person.
Okay. So they do understand that God kind of enables you in some way through His grace, but at the end of the day, you kind of just got to be a good person and follow what the Watchtower tells you to do. And
Pretty much.
If you do that effectively, then you've got a good chance that you're probably going to get into heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to prove yourself worthy.
Okay. All right. I think maybe we've got maybe one more time here for one more question here.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. It says, thank you for the insightful presentation, Dmitry. Would you say that Scientology took some tips from the Jehovah's Witnesses with regards to how to run their structure?
I doubt it. I doubt, because Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientology are very different in the way they operate and in the claims they make. Of course, all the authoritarian manipulative structures have something in common. And again, if you look at George Orwell's classic 1980 that 1984 that I've mentioned today, you'll see a lot of those things mentioned in there. But if you look at the details, you'll see that Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses are very different. And again, I don't mean that Scientology is better. It's bad, but in a different way. It's different. It's very different.
Yeah. And so maybe there's some parallels just in terms of the manipulative, coercive aspects of these religious movements, in which
I think whatever the parallels are, they are common to most cults of that nature.
Yes. And so the way in which they have you talked a very good use an umbrella organization, and then within it they have certain tools and techniques by which to manipulate and coerce people, and one of which seems to me that you've got to really control the thoughts of everybody within that crowd. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, it seems it's clear that the Watchtower publications is the chief means by which they do that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. I think that we are done now with our questions, Dmitry. And I just want to, on behalf of Russia, Christie, South Africa, just like to thank you for your time and your work. And I know that you actually know quite a lot about a number of other cults as well. And this is where you guys are experts. So maybe we can have you do some more stuff for us in the future, and maybe on some of the specifics as well. I'd love for you to do something for us on the Watchtower translation, their version of the Bible. That I think would be very helpful.
That'd be interesting.
So maybe we can get you to do something for us in the future on that. But thank you very much. God bless you and your work in Russia. And we're praying for salvation to come to Russia. And we also thank you for coming to help us next year. Maybe we'll get to see you out here again, helping us with the work here in Africa where the church is growing. We certainly need men like you and women like you who understand the threat the cults pose to the church. So thank you. God bless you. And we really appreciate the time that you've given us for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Stay safe.
Yes, we'll do.